what if everything you think you know about the Middle East is only half the story? Because beyond the headlines, there's an entirely different world most people never experience. In this video, we're going to uncover that world. First, a few key facts that put everything into perspective, and then the most extraordinary places across the region. And one of them might completely change the way you see this part of the world. Before we get to the places, we need to understand what the Middle East actually is, because even that is not as simple as it sounds. The Middle East isn't a single country or even a clearly defined region. It's a crossroads, a space that connects three continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, all within a relatively compact area. From the eastern Mediterranean coast to the Arabian Sea, the region stretches roughly 4,000 kilometers. That's about 2,500 miles. And within that space, you'll find countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, Turkey, the United Arab Emirates, Oman, Jordan, Iraq, Israel, Egypt, and several others, each with its own language, culture, and history. And yet, they're all connected. One of the reasons this region became so important goes back thousands of years, because this is where some of the earliest known civilizations on Earth began. In an area often called Mesopotamia, located between two major rivers, humans started building cities over 5,000 years ago. That's long before ancient Rome, long before most of Europe had permanent settlements. Here, people weren't just surviving, they were organizing, creating laws, developing writing. In fact, one of the first writing systems ever created, cuneiform, appeared here around 3100 BCE. That's over 5,000 years ago. And it completely changed how humans communicated. And that leads to something most people don't expect. Some of the ideas you use every single day trace back to this region. Time, for example. The 60-minute hour and 60-second minute system we still use today comes from ancient civilizations in this part of the world. The same applies to early mathematics, astronomy, and even mapping the stars. Because in regions with clear desert skies, people could observe the night sky in incredible detail. And over time, they turned those observations into systems. Now here's something even more interesting. The Middle East has always been about movement. Not just people living in one place, but constantly traveling. Trade routes once crossed thousands of kilometers, often over 3,000 kilometers, which is nearly 1,900 miles, connecting East Asia with Europe. Caravans carrying silk, spices, gold, and other goods would move across deserts, mountains, and valleys. And those journeys weren't just about trade. They carried ideas, languages, beliefs, entire cultures moving from one side of the world to the other. That's one of the reasons why this region became so diverse. Even today, within a relatively small distance, you can hear completely different languages. Arabic, Persian, Turkish, each with its own alphabet, sound, and history. And sometimes you can cross just a few hundred kilometers and feel like you've entered a completely different world. Geography plays a huge role in that, because when people think of the Middle East, they often imagine endless desert. And yes, deserts do dominate large parts of the region. Some of them stretch for over 1,000 kilometers, roughly 620 miles, with dunes that can reach heights of more than 250 meters, which is around 820 feet. But that's only part of the picture. There are also mountain ranges rising above 4,000 meters, that's over 13,000 feet, where temperatures can drop well below freezing in winter. Coastlines along warm seas, fertile valleys where agriculture has existed for thousands of years, even wetlands and marshes that support entirely different ecosystems. And then there's water, or more precisely, the lack of it. Some regions receive less than 50 millimeters of rain per year. That's under 2 inches. To put that into perspective, many European cities receive over 600 millimeters annually, nearly 24 inches. So survival here has always required adaptation. Ancient systems were developed to store and transport water over long distances. Underground channels, sometimes stretching for several kilometers, would carry water from mountains into dry settlements. And remarkably, some of these systems are still in use today. Now, imagine building cities in that environment, where every drop of water matters, where temperatures can shift dramatically between day and night, where the landscape itself is constantly changing. And yet, people didn't just build. They built things that lasted, structures that have stood for centuries, sometimes even thousands of years. There's also another layer to this region that's easy to overlook, because it's not just geographically complex. It's culturally layered in a way few places on Earth are. Three major world religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, all trace their origins to this region. And over time, these beliefs shaped architecture, cities, traditions, and daily life. Sometimes peacefully, sometimes through conflict, but always leaving a mark. And that's what makes the Middle East so unique. It's not just one story. It's layers of stories built on top of each other. Ancient foundations, with modern cities rising above them. Trade routes turning into highways. Old traditions existing alongside rapid change. And once you start to see those layers, you begin to understand something important. This region isn't defined by a single image. It's defined by contrast. And that contrast is exactly what you're about to see. Because the places we're about to explore bring all of this together in ways that are hard to explain until you actually see them. Socotra Island doesn't look like a place that should exist on Earth. It sits in the Arabian Sea, about 350 kilometers from mainland Yemen, roughly 220 miles, completely isolated for millions of years. And that isolation changed everything. Around 1/3 of its plant life can't be found anywhere else on the planet. The most famous example is the dragon's blood tree, with its wide umbrella-shaped canopy designed to capture moisture from the air. It's not just unusual in appearance. It's a survival strategy in a place where rainfall is extremely limited. That's what makes Socotra so fascinating. This isn't just a beautiful island. It's an ecosystem that evolved almost like a separate world. Limestone plateaus, white sand dunes, and turquoise waters create a landscape that constantly shifts as you move across the island. In some areas, strong seasonal winds, known as monsoons, can make parts of Socotra inaccessible for months at a time, and that natural isolation has preserved it. Even today, development remains minimal, and much of the island still feels untouched, which is why stepping onto Socotra doesn't feel like visiting a destination. It feels like discovering something. And yet, as remote as this place is, it's only the beginning of what this region has to offer. Because just across the sea, along a very different coastline, another kind of landscape starts to take shape. Muscat feels different the moment you arrive. Unlike many rapidly modernized cities in the region, Oman's capital has taken a more controlled approach to development. Strict building regulations limit height and color, which is why much of the city is still defined by low-rise, sand-colored architecture that blends into the surrounding mountains. And those mountains are not just a backdrop. They rise sharply along the coastline, creating narrow corridors where the city stretches between rock and sea. Historically, this location made it an important port. For centuries, trade routes connected Muscat to East Africa, India, and Persia, bringing goods like spices, textiles, and frankincense through its harbors. But what makes Muscat stand out today is its balance. It feels modern, but not overwhelming. Traditional, but not frozen in time. And as the coastline continues southeast, the landscape begins to change again. Because not far from here, the mountains open up. At first, it doesn't look like anything special. A narrow opening in the rocks with a path leading inward. But once you step inside, everything changes. Wadi Shab is one of Oman's most unique natural formations, shaped over thousands of years by water cutting through the mountains. To reach it, you first cross a short stretch of water by boat, then follow a trail for about 45 minutes along cliffs and palm-lined paths. And the further you go, the more unexpected it becomes. Clear turquoise pools appear between the rocks. Water flows gently through the canyon, even in the heat. And eventually, the path disappears completely because the final section can only be reached by swimming. Stretching over 12,500 square kilometers, about 4,800 square miles, this desert is defined by long, linear dunes that can reach heights of up to 100 meters, or around 330 feet. Unlike random dune fields, these formations follow consistent patterns shaped by seasonal wind systems that have been active for thousands of years. And those winds are still at work. Over time, they slowly shift the dunes, changing the landscape in ways that are almost impossible to notice in a single visit, but very real over longer periods. Despite the harsh conditions, people have lived here for generations. Bedouin communities developed ways to navigate, survive, and adapt to this environment, relying on deep knowledge of the land. Temperatures during the day can exceed 45 degrees Celsius, around 113 degrees Fahrenheit, before dropping significantly at night. And that daily cycle defines life here, because once the sun sets, the desert transforms completely. The heat fades, the sky opens up, and the scale of the landscape becomes even more apparent. And from here, the journey continues into a very different kind of environment, one shaped not by nature alone, but by rapid change. At first glance, it feels almost too precise. Wide boulevards, carefully planned districts, and architecture that looks deliberately composed rather than grown over time. Abu Dhabi is not a city that expanded randomly. It was designed. Located on an island in the Persian Gulf, about 250 meters, roughly 800 feet from the mainland, the city developed rapidly after oil was discovered in the mid-20th century. Before that, this was a small settlement focused on fishing and pearl diving, and that shift happened incredibly fast. Within just a few decades, infrastructure, government institutions, and cultural landmarks were built from the ground up. One of the most recognizable features today is its architectural approach. Instead of pushing upward as much as possible, the city focuses on space and symmetry. Large open areas, long waterfronts, and structured layouts define how it feels to move through it. Even the coastline has been reshaped, with artificial islands extending into the sea. But what makes Abu Dhabi interesting isn't just how modern it is, it's how controlled that modernity feels. Nothing seems accidental, and as you move further along the coast, that control begins to shift into something much more intense. Here, the scale changes immediately. Everything feels bigger, taller, and more concentrated. Dubai grew from a modest trading port into one of the fastest developing cities in the world, and much of that transformation happened in less than 50 years. The skyline reflects that ambition. Dozens of high-rise buildings dominate the horizon, including structures that reach over 800 meters, more than 2,600 feet into the sky. But what's more interesting is how the city keeps redefining itself. Artificial islands were constructed offshore, reshaping the coastline in patterns visible even from space. Entire districts were built with specific purposes: finance, tourism, residential, each functioning almost like a separate zone. And yet, all of it exists in a place where summer temperatures regularly exceed 40 degrees Celsius, around 104 degrees Fahrenheit. That creates a unique dynamic. Life shifts indoors during the hottest parts of the day, while the city comes alive at night. Lighting, reflections, and movement transform how it feels after sunset. It's a place built on speed, vision, and constant change. But just beyond the city limits, that energy fades quickly. The Liwa Desert marks the edge of one of the largest continuous sand deserts in the world. Located along the northern boundary of the Rub al-Khali, this region extends for 600 kilometers, which is roughly 370 miles into the interior of the Arabian Peninsula. And And this is not a flat desert. The dunes here are among the tallest on Earth, some rising over 300 meters, nearly 1,000 feet, creating massive curved formations shaped by wind over thousands of years. Driving through this area is not straightforward. Soft sand, steep slopes, and shifting terrain make navigation challenging, even with modern vehicles. And historically, this was one of the most difficult environments to cross, yet people lived along its edges. Small oasis settlements formed where underground water reached the surface, allowing date palms and limited agriculture to survive. Those pockets of life stand in sharp contrast to everything around them, because beyond them, the desert stretches endlessly. And as that vastness continues, it eventually leads towards something entirely different. At first, it feels familiar. Glass towers, clean streets, and a skyline rising quickly from what was once open land. Doha has transformed dramatically over the past few decades, growing from a small coastal town into a modern capital in a relatively short time. But what makes it interesting isn't just how fast it developed. It's how deliberately that development was planned. Large parts of the city were built on reclaimed land, extending the coastline outward. Districts like West Bay were designed almost from scratch, creating a dense cluster of high-rise buildings along the waterfront. At the same time, traditional elements were preserved and reintroduced. Markets, known as souks, were restored to reflect older architectural styles, even though much of what you see today has been carefully reconstructed. And while the city continues to expand, it still faces the same environmental conditions as the surrounding region. Summer temperatures regularly climb above 45 degrees Celsius, about 113 degrees Fahrenheit, shaping how life moves throughout the day. It's a place defined by rapid change, but not far from here, the pace slows down completely. At first, you only notice the color. Deep reds and warm tones stretching across rock formations that rise unexpectedly from the desert floor. AlUla is not just a single site, but a region shaped over millions of years by erosion, wind, and time. Sandstone cliffs, narrow canyons, and isolated rock structures create a landscape that feels almost sculpted. But the most interesting part isn't just natural. It's what people built here. Over 2,000 years ago, this area became part of a major trade network, connecting southern Arabia with the Mediterranean. Caravans carrying incense and goods would pass through, and settlements formed along these routes. One of the most remarkable features is a collection of tombs carved directly into the rock. Precise geometric facades cut into massive stone walls, each one reflecting a different level of craftsmanship and status. And what stands out is how well they've been preserved. Because of the dry climate, many details remain visible even today. This is a place where natural and human history exist side by side. And as the terrain continues north, that connection between landscape and architecture becomes even more dramatic. It begins with a narrow passage, walls of rock rising on both sides, closing in as you move forward. And then, suddenly, the space opens. Petra was carved directly into sandstone cliffs over 2,000 years ago, creating one of the most recognizable archaeological sites in the world. But what most people don't realize is how large it actually is. The entire area covers more than 260 square kilometers, about 100 square miles filled with tombs, temples, and structures spread across a network of valleys. And it wasn't built randomly. The Nabateans, who created Petra, developed advanced systems to control water in an otherwise dry environment. Channels, reservoirs, and tunnels allowed them to collect and store rainfall, making long-term settlement possible. That level of planning is what made the city successful. Not just visually impressive, but functional. And even today, you can see how those systems were integrated into the landscape. Because here, architecture doesn't dominate nature, it works with it. And as you move beyond these carved facades, the environment shifts again. The space opens wider, the rock formations become more distant, and the scale changes completely. At first, it feels empty. Wide open space, minimal vegetation, and rock formations rising sharply from the sand. But that simplicity is what defines Wadi Rum. Often called the Valley of the Moon, this desert landscape covers around 720 square kilometers, roughly 280 square miles, and is shaped by granite and sandstone mountains that have been eroded over millions of years. What makes it different from other deserts is the scale of those formations. Massive cliffs and natural arches create vertical structures that break up the flat terrain, giving the area a layered appearance. Some of these rock walls rise over 1,000, 700 meters, about 5,600 feet above sea level, and the color changes constantly. Depending on the time of day, the sand can appear deep, red, orange, or even purple, reflecting the mineral composition of the rock. This environment has also been used for thousands of years. Ancient inscriptions carved into the stone show that people passed through here long before modern borders existed. Today, it's known for its cinematic quality. There's a point where elevation becomes noticeable. The air feels heavier, the heat more intense, and the surrounding land begins to sit below what you'd normally consider sea level. The Dead Sea lies about 430 meters below sea level, roughly 1,410 feet, making it the lowest exposed point on Earth. And that single fact changes everything about how it behaves. The water here contains around 10 times more salt than typical ocean water. That density means you don't sink. Even without trying, your body stays afloat. But the environment is more than just unusual. It's extreme. High evaporation rates, combined with minimal inflow, have caused water levels to drop significantly over the past decades. In some areas, the shoreline has retreated by several kilometers, a few miles, exposing salt formations and creating sinkholes along the coast. It's a place shaped by imbalance, and that tension between stability and change is visible everywhere. Jerusalem is one of the oldest continuously inhabited cities in the world, with a history stretching back over 3,000 years. What makes it unique isn't just its age. It's how much is concentrated in such a small area. The Old City alone covers less than 1 square kilometer, under 0.4 square miles. Yet within that space, you'll find places that are central to 3 major world religions. For Judaism, it includes the Western Wall, where people have come to pray for centuries. For Christianity, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands here, traditionally associated with the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. And for Islam, the Al-Aqsa Mosque is located on a plateau that has been significant for over 1,000 years. All of this exists within walking distance, often just a few minutes apart, and that proximity shapes the experience. You're not moving through a single story. You're moving through multiple layers at once. It feels quieter almost immediately, less crowded, more contained, and centered around a single story, rather than many overlapping ones. Bethlehem is located just about 10 kilometers south of Jerusalem, roughly 6 miles, and despite that short distance, the atmosphere shifts noticeably. This city is traditionally known as the birthplace of Jesus, and at its center stands the Church of the Nativity. What makes it remarkable isn't just its significance, but its continuity. The structure you see today largely dates back to the 6th century, making it one of the oldest continuously used churches in the world. And beneath it, a small grotto marks the spot associated with that birth. Visitors descend a narrow staircase to reach it, entering a space that is surprisingly modest compared to its global importance. That contrast defines the experience. A place known worldwide, contained within a relatively small, simple setting. And yet, the impact it has had over time is enormous. It rises suddenly from the surrounding landscape, a massive plateau, isolated and elevated, with steep cliffs dropping on all sides. Masada stands about 450 meters above the Dead Sea, roughly 1,500 feet, and its position was not chosen by accident. In ancient times, this natural fortress was nearly impossible to access. Only a few narrow paths lead to the top, making it one of the most defensible locations in the region. And that's exactly how it was used. During the 1st century, it became a stronghold during a major conflict, with a small group holding out against a much larger force for months. What remains today includes storage rooms, water systems, and living quarters, all built to sustain life in an extremely harsh environment. And that's what stands out. Even here, in a place with almost no natural water sources, complex systems were created to collect and store rainfall. Because survival here required planning, precision, and a deep understanding of the environment. From above, the view stretches across a landscape that feels almost empty. And as that landscape continues north, it begins to change. Jeita Grotto is a system of limestone caves extending over 9 kilometers, about 5.6 miles, formed by water slowly dissolving rock over millions of years. The upper galleries can be explored on foot, where stalactites and stalagmites have grown into complex formations. Some reach heights of over 8 meters, around 26 feet, creating vertical structures that feel almost architectural. Below that, a river flows through the lower cave. Here, visitors move by boat, following the water through a space that continues beyond what's immediately visible. The cave is still evolving. Water continues to shape it, slowly altering the formations over time. And as you return to the surface, the environment shifts to open landscapes shaped by some of the earliest civilizations in history. At first, it doesn't look as grand as you might expect. Low walls, reconstructed sections, and wide open space in the middle of the desert. But this is Babylon, and what you're seeing here is only a fraction of what once existed. Located about 85 kilometers south of modern Baghdad, roughly 53 miles, Babylon was one of the most important cities of the ancient world. At its peak, it was a center of power, culture, and innovation. The city is often associated with the famous Hanging Gardens, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Although their exact location remains uncertain, the idea itself reflects how advanced this civilization was. What's more concrete is the Ishtar Gate. Originally covered in deep blue glazed bricks and decorated with animal figures, it marked one of the main entrances into the city. Even in its reconstructed form, you can still see the level of detail and scale. Because Babylon wasn't just built to function, it was built to impress, and that ambition shaped everything around it. At first, it looks almost geometric, a massive stepped structure rising from the desert floor, with clean lines and a very distinct shape. The Ziggurat of Ur dates back over 4,000 years, making it one of the oldest surviving monumental structures in the region. It was built by the Sumerians, one of the earliest known civilizations, and served as a temple platform. Unlike pyramids, which are often associated with burial, ziggurats were designed to elevate sacred spaces above the surrounding land. This one originally stood about 30 meters high, roughly 100 feet, and was constructed using mud bricks reinforced with baked outer layers. And that construction method is part of what allowed it to survive. Despite thousands of years of exposure, the core structure remains visible. What stands out is the symmetry, the staircases, the terraces, the alignment, all carefully planned. Because this wasn't just architecture, it was symbolic, a connection between earth and sky. And as you move further north, the scale changes again. The Erbil Citadel has been continuously inhabited for thousands of years, with some estimates suggesting over 6,000 years of human presence. That makes it one of the oldest inhabited settlements on Earth. The citadel itself sits about 25 meters above the surrounding city, roughly 82 feet, creating a natural defensive advantage. From a distance, it appears almost like a solid wall, but inside, it's a network of narrow streets, courtyards, and traditional houses. Over time, layers were added, rebuilt, and modified, creating a dense and complex structure. And that layering is what defines it. You're not looking at a single moment in history. You're looking at many, because each generation built on top of the previous one, adapting the space rather than replacing it entirely. And that continuity is rare. Persepolis was not just a city. It was designed as a statement. Built around 518 BCE by the Achaemenid Empire, this ceremonial capital was meant to represent power at its peak. Located about 60 kilometers from modern Shiraz, roughly 37 miles, it sat along key routes connecting different parts of the empire. And that's important, because Persepolis wasn't isolated. Delegations from across the empire would travel here, bringing gifts, paying tribute, and participating in events that reinforced a centralized authority. You can still see that in the carvings. Stone reliefs line the staircases, showing detailed processions of people from different regions, each wearing distinct clothing and carrying specific offerings. And what stands out is the precision, the proportions, the symmetry, the repetition. Everything was planned to create a sense of order, but that order didn't last. In 330 BCE, the city was partially destroyed, leaving behind the remains you see today. And yet, even in that state, the intention is clear. At first, the exterior doesn't fully prepare you. A relatively simple structure, with traditional architectural elements and a calm presence. But inside, everything changes. The Nasir al-Mulk Mosque, often called the Pink Mosque, is known for how it interacts with light. Built in the late 19th century, it uses stained glass windows in a way that transforms the interior during the early morning hours. As sunlight enters, it passes through colored panels and spreads across the floor, walls, and columns. And that effect is not random. The patterns were carefully designed so that the space shifts visually as the light changes. Carpets, tiles, and glass all work together to create a dynamic interior. And for a short period each day, the entire hall is covered in color. What makes it interesting is how temporary that moment is. If you arrive too late, you miss it completely. Because this place isn't defined by constant presence. It's defined by timing. And that idea of shifting conditions continues. Because beyond the cities, the landscape becomes far more extreme. The Lut Desert is one of the hottest places on Earth. Satellite measurements have recorded surface temperatures exceeding 70 degrees Celsius. That's around 158 degrees Fahrenheit, making it one of the most extreme environments ever observed. Located in southeastern Iran, it stretches for over 400 kilometers, or roughly 250 miles, with areas that receive almost no rainfall. What defines this desert are the formations known as yardangs, long, narrow ridges carved by wind over thousands of years, creating patterns that extend across the landscape. From above, they look almost like waves frozen in place. And that's what makes this area unique. It's not just empty, it's structured. Wind, heat, and time working together to shape something highly specific. But conditions here are too extreme for permanent settlement, and that absence is part of its identity. At first, it looks like erosion, soft rock shaped by wind and water into unusual forms. But the longer you look, the more intentional it starts to feel. Cappadocia is known for its fairy chimneys, tall, cone-shaped rock formations created from volcanic ash that hardened over time. The region covers several hundred square kilometers, over 200 square miles, and what makes it unique is not just the landscape, but how people used it. Instead of building on the surface, early inhabitants carved directly into the rock. Homes, storage rooms, churches, and even entire underground cities were created within these formations. Some of these underground systems extend several levels below ground, designed for protection and long-term habitation. And that adaptation is what defines the region. The environment wasn't changed. It was used. Today, the area is also known for hot air balloons that rise at sunrise, giving a sense of scale that's hard to grasp from the ground. Because from above, the landscape appears even more complex. And as that terrain gradually fades, it transforms into something entirely different. At first glance, it almost looks artificial. Bright white terraces cascading down a hillside, filled with shallow pools of water. But this is entirely natural. Pamukkale, which translates to cotton castle, was formed by mineral-rich thermal waters flowing over the landscape for thousands of years. As the water moves, it deposits calcium carbonate, gradually building up these terraces. The result is a series of stepped formations that stretch across the slope, creating a layered appearance. The entire area covers about 2.7 square kilometers, roughly 1 square mile, and the water temperature in some pools can reach around 35 degrees Celsius or about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. And that combination of warmth and minerals has attracted people for centuries. Right above the terraces, the ancient city of Hierapolis was built, turning the site into a destination for bathing and relaxation, even in Roman times. But maintaining this environment requires control. Too much exposure or unrestricted access can damage the formations. So today, movement is limited in certain areas to preserve the structure, because this place is constantly forming and eroding at the same time. It stretches across 2 continents, a city divided by water, yet connected by history, trade, and movement. Istanbul sits along the Bosphorus Strait, a narrow waterway about 30 kilometers long, roughly 19 miles, linking the Black Sea to the Sea of Marmara. And that position has shaped everything. For centuries, this was one of the most important crossroads in the world. Empires rose and fell here, each leaving its mark on the city. What makes Istanbul unique is that you can see those layers. Roman, Byzantine, and Ottoman influences exist side by side, often within the same neighborhood. Structures that were once churches became mosques. Old city walls still define parts of the urban layout, and markets that have operated for hundreds of years continue to function today. The scale is different here. This is not a single site. It's an entire city shaped by time. And that creates a constant sense of movement, because history here isn't preserved in one place. It's spread across the entire landscape. At first, it doesn't look like a desert at all. There are no dunes stretching endlessly into the horizon. Instead, The landscape is filled with white rock formations scattered across the ground, shaped into unusual forms that resemble animals, towers, and abstract figures. This is Egypt's White Desert. Located about 500 kilometers southwest of Cairo, roughly 310 miles, it was formed over millions of years when this area was once covered by an ancient sea. The white formations are made of chalk and limestone, gradually sculpted by wind and sand into their current shapes, and that process is still ongoing. What makes this place stand out is how different it feels compared to typical deserts. The color, the texture, and the shapes create a landscape that changes depending on the light. At sunrise and sunset, shadows stretch across the formations, altering how they appear from one moment to the next. And at night, with almost no light pollution, the sky becomes part of the experience. It's quiet, almost completely still. Luxor is often described as the world's largest open-air museum, and that description is not an exaggeration. The area includes temple complexes, tombs, and structures that date back over 3,000 years. What makes it unique is the concentration. Sites are located within a relatively short distance of each other, allowing you to move through different periods of ancient Egyptian history in a single day. Massive columns, detailed carvings, and long corridors define the architecture. Many of these structures were aligned with astronomical events, designed to interact with sunlight at specific times of the year. And that level of planning reflects how advanced this civilization was, because these weren't just buildings. They were part of a larger system, a way of organizing space, belief, and power. And as you move further north along the same river, that system reaches its most recognizable form. The pyramids of Giza are among the most studied and recognized structures in the world, yet they still raise questions. The largest of them, the Great Pyramid, was originally about 146 meters tall, roughly 480 feet, and remained the tallest man-made structure on Earth for over 3,800 years. What makes it remarkable isn't just its size, it's how it was built. Each block can weigh several tons, and the entire structure consists of millions of them, assembled with a level of precision that is still difficult to fully explain. And this was achieved without modern machinery. The alignment is also notable. The pyramid is positioned almost perfectly along the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, with minimal deviation. And that accuracy reflects a deep understanding of geometry and observation. And even today, standing at the base, the scale is difficult to fully process, because some structures don't just represent history, they define it. And in many ways, this is where the journey comes full circle, from the unfamiliar to something instantly recognizable, but now seen with a completely different perspective. From places that don't feel real to some of the oldest structures ever built, the Middle East reveals itself in layers. And once you see it this way, it's hard to look at this region the same again. Thank you for watching, and I hope you discovered something new along the way.